Hello there and welcome to The Value of Everything. Now, I would imagine that you are fairly similar to me in terms of not having too much previous training in terms of how to conduct yourself in an argument. This is one of the most vital skills that anyone can possess. In the old days when philosophers created academies, rhetoric was way up there as one of the most important skills to master. Now, the interesting thing about rhetoric is it did get curtailed in history a little bit. The rulers and the elites realized that it didn't have quite the largest audience. In the old days, you could speak in an arena and your voice could only carry a certain distance, so you had the ability to talk to an audience of, say, around a few hundred people. The creative, the thinkers, and the power-hungry all descended into book writing, as you had the ability to reach the largest targeted audience. Now, interesting things have happened in modern times. Firstly, you would have radio broadcasts where you would have a very, very large audience. However, it wasn't up to anybody to just rattle off on the microphone. It was held amongst the powerful and the wealthy as a speaking piece for their ideologies. Through ancient to modern times, rhetoric has been trained to the elites. In the top universities, you have public advisors who will teach a political orator how to present themselves, not only in physical appearance, but their body language and the way they adapt their voice to empathize with the audience. So from broadcast radio to broadcast cinema to broadcast TV, we now have the internet, which enables individuals to broadcast their thoughts, knowledge, and ideologies. So from broadcast, we go into the podcasting phase. This is where an individual can provide programming in terms of sound media, but also that can extend into YouTube channels where you do have the full visual and audio ability to captivate somebody. Probably got you thinking right now because you're listening to some very strange hypnotic voice, wondering if I'm programming you right now, which is probably most likely true. Anybody's interaction with somebody is going to have a slight effect on your personality, mainly only just a tiny bit, but as time progresses, I would imagine more so and more so. I find that I usually like to pick people that I aspire to be. I try and take a little piece of their personality and adapt it to my own. So this is a very long spiel of an introduction, so I will cut to the chase as to what I'm getting at. We are of the age of rhetoric. It was once the day of creative writing and creative arts and broadcast media. Now we are at the age of rhetoric. The one who can stand and speak and captivate their audience the best will emerge as the most influential figures of their day. Okay, so far I've been going down a bit of a sinister path in terms of, say, mind manipulation, but also there is the spreading of wisdom. You could say spreading the love of wisdom, which is philosophy itself, where truth and reason triumphs over the rhetoric and the way that you can use relativism. So I'm painting a picture in your minds. On one side, we have the philosophers, and on the other side, we have the sophists. So sophistry will try to tap into what will seem to be the most convenient truth or the most believable truth. So let me give you a quick example of that. If somebody would turn around to you and say, "Oh, he's an evil man and deserves to be locked up forevermore," potentially that is true, but you are trying to bypass a lot of the thinking abilities of the brain. Notice the information was very quick, easy, and had a solution in a very short space of time. So on a philosophical side, you would try to take more of a balanced approach. You would try to look into the evidence, what is the positives, what are the negatives, and determine a view from morality. So I've mentioned the words relativism and rhetoric. Let's just explore those for 1 second. Now, relativism is fairly easy to explain if you just change the word slightly into relate or relatism, which isn't a word, then it's a little bit easier to comprehend in the terms of if it's related to me, well, this topic isn't really related to me that much, or, well, I relate to it in this way, so from my perspective, I see it as true, therefore there is a deficiency in the way that you are thinking. And when we use the word rhetoric, we are saying that you're using speech to manipulate as well as persuade. You may have heard the phrase rhetorical question. That's pretty much where you're trying to manipulate somebody into answering your question in the way that you want it to be. So a good example from this perspective is for somebody to take an emotional stance and say, well, do you really want kids to starve? As you can see, this question is generally unanswerable. It channels you into two options which both shut down the argument and the way of thinking. For if you were to answer the question yes, then you'd sound like some immoral psychopath. And if you were to answer no, then it sounds like you're surrendering to the better argument. On the other side, we do have the philosopher who definitely does ask questions, but the way in which they ask questions is to seek further knowledge. Also, as you can tell, the outcome is not guided. There isn't a particular path or destination that the question or the arguments should lead to. The questions are there to seek out the truth, no matter how inconvenient it may be. So here we come to a very important stage now between sophistry and philosophy. A sophist will take subjective matter and use it and abuse it to achieve their means, whereas a philosopher has the objective to find truth no matter what it is, even when it's very uncomfortable for them. So let's just explore relativism a little bit more. There's usually three areas of relativism which gets applied. Firstly, there is the cultural relativism, whereby I would say to you, us English folk, we have our own ways, customs and manners. We have an understanding of morality. As the saying goes, when in Rome, do as Romans do. As you may see, if I went to another country and did take on the local customs, I would assimilate fairly well, and you would potentially say that it is a path to greater success. The next style of relativism is morality of our own choosing, so we really just make it all up in our own minds as to what is right from wrong, and really we do not have any objective reasoning on a way in which we can conduct ourselves. So for the final relativism, you would say that there is moral relativism. This, you could say, is the sociopaths category, whereby they would think in their terms that the powerful create laws that favor the powerful. Man isn't created equally, so people must do as they do. This is all very interesting. If you could think to yourself, you could see two people that are arguing, and one is full of emotion. They are talking from their own related stories, they're beating their chest, there's tears rolling down their face, and they are really driving you and persuading you to their destination, which is subjective. And on the other stage, you do have somebody who is more objective, rational, trying to apply logic, and is trying to seek the truth regardless of what is going on. Now, to the untrained eye or ear, the more compelling argument is going to come from the sophist. So, first warning sign, if you see the sincere one that you relate to, potentially raise your guard, and the one who is being a little less emotional and trying to put forward logical arguments, it may be worthwhile to lend your ear. I really do hope that no psychopaths or sociopaths are listening into this podcast and using it for their own evil means. I hope this does reach out to a few good people out there who can use it to expose the sophists out there and to let truth, reason and virtue prevail. Okay, now let me introduce you to a demagogue. This is somebody who takes a position of power and they seek your support by appealing to popular desires and your prejudices rather than an actual logical, rational argument. This does fit in perfectly well with a sophist who uses relativism. Now, remember those appealing to desires? One of the most important desires is for us to feel like we belong. So just always look out for the language of we, us, together. It's all of the language to state that that person who is arguing for your side and not anyone else's. Also, you'll notice that they will act and dress differently to the normal citizen, as if they are of a position of power and confidence. So you will see a very smart tailored suit. You will see a whole load of medals on that person. It really doesn't really matter what that person's wearing, but it has to address the power and the seniority of that person. Now, note the campfire. So back in the day when we were all running around in the bush, there were storytellers who could captivate the audience. We can be quite susceptible to this because of our imaginations. Everything is combined and interwoven into this susceptibility trick. Obviously, in the past where there was power, we had to go along with it or we would be casted away by the tribe. So there is an imperative to comply with the powers and be very agreeable. It is actually a natural evolutionary cycle for us to go, yes sir, rather than to question power. So we've got unity, we've got fear as well. So the fear of humiliation, the fear of some extremity for affecting the tribe. These are all the tools of trickery. Tap into our fears and desires to take us on a certain path. So, I've just been trying to highlight a few things which a demagogue may do, but there is an important question out there, which is how to identify or how to know when you are being manipulated. First point is, if that person is not open to questioning, then you do not have a balanced and fair argument, but you have somebody's ideology who is just persuading you from one perspective. This is obviously a very dangerous situation because you are having a narrative rather than a dialogue. So this is really where somebody is taking you on their path. They are leading the way in their vision, and really they're not opening themselves to any other points or opinion. You may note that advertisement agencies will do this as well. They are putting forward a certain appeal to your desires to lean you in a certain manner. Now, obviously, if you could say that there was a tobacco agency putting out an advertisement, then they would say, hey, smoke a cigarette and you can look so cool. But on the other side of the scale, you would have a health warning as well to state that the product that you would be consuming is dangerous for your health. There is usually two sides to an argument and potentially even more. The problem is that if you only ever hear one side of the argument, then that can be indoctrination, particularly if they are using means to prevent you from hearing any other side of the argument. Now, fortunately, in the West, we do not have dictatorships, so we are not quite in this situation. Our politicians are open to debate and there is freedom of speech. This doesn't necessarily mean that we have perfect balanced arguments, because there are many more methods of manipulation. Okay, so you're not arguing with a dictator who is stating their narrative, and if you were ever to question them, they would send you to be hanged. This is a situation where you can engage with them in dialogue. Also, another thing to note, this doesn't necessarily need to be a politician. This could be somebody very much closer to home. This could be a sibling, parent, or spouse. Okay, so when you're engaged, think in the mind of a philosopher. Always think that you are two beings who are trying to seek out the truth at whatever expense. This means being open-minded and willing to explore every point. So when you are conducting an argument and you raise a point, be very wary when somebody revises their statement or ignores exploring the point. Also, if the question has angered that person, then full-on rhetoric is being engaged at that point, which means that you're in an emotional tornado, which is going to make it very hard to ascertain logical points. Now, anger can be used to put the opponent on unshored footing and puts them in a fearful situation of threatening their well-being. So let's go back to the politician's tricks. I'm going to create a scenario here where there is a politician's press conference on the state of the economy. So let me begin with the member of the press putting forward this argument. Mr. President, the state of the economy is awful. Unemployment is sky high. Businesses are failing like never before. Do you recognize that your party's policies have failed the public? So the press man there has shot his bullets of words through to the politician. However, the politician is a master of trickery, manipulation. He is literally doing that bend back when those bullets are flying in the Matrix right now, and he's going to actually pick up the bullets and fire them back. So watch out for this one. I have come here today to speak on the opening of this great new hospital. I don't think it's right that you should spoil the hard work that these fine people have done with asking your impertinent questions, making a mockery of these people's achievement. So, as you can see there, the politician has changed the subject and ignored the original point, while also massaging the people's ego with this particular fog of the opening of a new hospital. He has portrayed himself as this great protector, so righteous in defending these great people who have worked so hard to build this new hospital. An unanswered question is always going to be easier for a politician. If you are answering questions, then you're really going to be pulled up in the future about these. So the least amount of information that you provide, full avoidance, is always the best option. You've got to be really clever in the way that you memorize all of these points and make sure that you do not put yourself in any traps that could lasso you in the future. Now remember that when I say traps, this is obviously the sophist wants to put you into a narrative, a certain direction, and they definitely do not want to falsify any of their statements to put them in an opposite direction. So that's why they do not want to self-trap themselves. Whereas with a philosopher, they always are going to be open to any questioning. In fact, they're going to invite questioning to explore any issue. All right, so let's put a politician in more of a tighter spot where they cannot avoid the question. They have to take a bash at answering. Now let's just keep to the same question as of the state of the economy. Look, you're not seeing the big picture. We are experiencing a disastrous fallout from the prior government's bad economic policy. Also, you don't have to look too far to see that other nations have got their economies totally out of control. We cannot help when our trade partners are falling at the wayside. You cannot overlook that our party is the only one who have made strides forward in ensuring that the poor's rights are safeguarded. I am frankly disappointed that you will ignore all the amazing work which has been done. Okay, so let's just look at what the politician has done there. Now they have put forward the argument of looking at the big picture. Essentially, they are shifting the blame onto the previous government, the other nations' economic trade partners. They're pushing it everywhere they can other than to taking it on for themselves.
Also, they have just tried to keep on to their mandate that they are protecting the poor's rights, and how dare you ever question protecting the poor? So here lies a fantastic way of pushing the blame somewhere else and also go back on the offensive. The best form of defense is attack. Okay, so let's just try and explore a fairly established argument whereby we have ascertained that slavery is immoral. So just to briefly outline, there is the victim and the offender when it comes to slavery. Firstly, from a victim standpoint, that slavery dehumanizes a person by removing their individualism. Essentially, they have no agency to make choices for the potential of a better life. Now, on the offender side, this essentially goes back to the golden rule: treat people the way in which you would like to be treated yourself. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is slip into the position of a slave owner. What a stupid idea. I don't understand what you want. If we were to end slavery, slaves would starve, farm production would vanish, as well as our safe neighborhoods. So, as you can see there, I have started with a contradiction by stating that I understood it and quoted it as a stupid idea, and then I said that I do not understand what you want at the same time, so I've contradicted myself at the start there. Also, with saying stupid, I've added a ad hominem, which basically insults the person who's put forward the argument. I've acted all confused, so that other person has to work harder in explaining what they're trying to say. I am jumping to my own conclusions, also by losing the points which have been originally mentioned, which states that slavery is immoral. Alright, let's go back to the slave owner again. Slaves have never had it as good as what it is now. I treat them well, they get fed, they have good shelter. You speak to them over there and they'll tell you. How would you like to see my slaves starving once you release them? My neighbour had his slaves run away, and they were found the following week, all shriveled up and dead.
So there you have it. So here again, I am looking at all of the good points, but refusing to investigate and explore any of the negatives. Also, there is a little bit of relativism going on here. So this is from his perspective. He's stating, oh, well, you ask the guys over there. Pretty much the slaves are going to say, yeah, he's doing really well for us because they are in the position of being subservient to the power slave owner. If they do not agree, then they are in trouble themselves. And also he's putting in some sort of relative stories there as well, just to state that everything has bad consequences. These consequences are just one single narrative. There is obviously multiple different consequences, as what we have in modern day with machinery doing the majority of our farm work now. You could say that my mindset is thinking on the simple side. Also, the slave owner could say something on the terms of who's going to farm the land now, and it doesn't tackle the question of morality, but it just takes everybody into a very narrow channeled way of thinking. Okay, and now we're going to reverse things, and you are in the position of power, and I'm going to use rhetoric back on you. So this is the barbarians are at the gates scenario. My lord, we need to bear arms. The barbarian hordes are almost at the gates, and they are seeking to annihilate us. They are merciless brutes who will stop at nothing to rape our women and tear apart our children. They have blood on the swords from the last village they decimated. The clock is ticking. Let's not waste our time on futile negotiation. Act now and show our might, whilst we'll still have a chance. Okay, so back to normality there. Hope you enjoyed my voice acting. So we start with a little bit of sincerity there in terms of my lord. Then we go straight into the fear-mongering stage by stating that the barbarous hordes are almost at the gate and they are seeking to annihilate us. After that, we pretty much go into how they're going to tear things apart, put vivid images straight into our imagination, there's blood on the swords, everything like that. And then we state that there is time running out and there is no point in negotiation whatsoever. And finalizing it off by stating that we've got some might, but we may as well use it now until we do not have any might to use again. Now, these potentially may be valid arguments, but it still isn't taking all of the aspects into the equation. Maybe the barbarians are up for negotiation. Maybe there is certain options that can be put onto the table. So this person who is advising the Lord at that moment is trying to get them to do one thing. Okay then, so how would somebody protect themselves from a rhetorician who is trying to channel the way of thinking? My first piece of advice would be to discriminate a little bit more against people who hold a position of power over you. This comes especially if abuse has come before, or even if you've just had a sense of a bad gut feeling. Now, when I say discriminate, this basically means raising your analysis of the way in which somebody is talking to you. Now, how do you duke it out with one of these sophists? Now, it's actually not quite as full-blown gunfire back and forth as what you may expect. This is more like a situation of not overreacting, not allowing your impulses to drive you to emotional conclusions. It's all about listening attentively and thinking if there is a different aspect which is being overlooked. This is putting you in the frame mind of posing a question which may put the arguer in a position to contradict themselves. So if I stated to you a bit of a nihilist perspective by stating, well, there isn't any purpose to anything, we're all going to die in the end, you could turn around to me and state, well, there isn't much of a purpose of you even arguing with me, so that pretty much invalidates your argument from the start. If you believe that there is no point to anything, then you wouldn't even be able to master the use of language to get the point that you were stating. Usually you will find that good questioning can unravel ideologies. Now let's state that you have posed your question and they are in the response to it. This is a very important time. You must remember your question and listen to the person who is arguing against you to hear if they are answering your question in a logical fashion. If they are not doing this or they're totally ignoring the question, then it's time to identify what they are doing incorrectly. So to recap, we listen attentively, we try to seek out a question which will raise the different aspect, then we will seek an answer which will satisfy the logic. If there is any fallacy with that, then we will identify it. But essentially, if there is no truth behind what is happening, then we return back to the same point beforehand of listening and waiting upon asking another question which sheds light on the other view. Now, in majority of scenarios, obviously, if you are going up against somebody who is of a position of power, then a lot of the questions are going to be a little bit inflammatory, especially if you are questioning the other person's power over you. But if somebody is stating something to you as if that is true, then you can always reverse it back on them and say that, well, you should be doing that as well, or you are applying a double standard. Okay, let's flip it again and state that the sophist is turning things around and posing questions to you. Now, it's interesting to listen at this point. If the questions are credible claims to state that you are poor at something or you're no good at something, then this is a very important stage because every claim requires credible evidence. The more credible the claim is, the more evidence that is required. If you ever assert something, then the burden of proof is upon you to establish this as true. So at this point, I'm going to provide you with a few questions that you would give to somebody who questions your ability. So at this point, you always can fight fire with fire. So a question can be answered with another question. As soon as somebody asserts something, they are on the back foot. So you could state that, why do you think my abilities are poor? Who am I being compared against? Where are you getting your information from? Do you think your comparison is fair? Could your judgment be prejudiced, distorted? Could culture have led you to a certain assumption? Have we failed to consider all of these points? How have you reached to your conclusion? If I do this task, does this nullify your assertion? And finally, are there any other plausible conclusions that could be made? Now, I dare you to try this, and I would imagine if you are going against the majority of people who are abusing their power, they will probably flip out and use anger as their retaliation. Now, when the burning flames of anger is at its fullest, then you can remain to stick to your point, state that you haven't answered my question. You can identify any of the fallacies which are being made. If they are changing the subject at any point, then you can always apply that at any stage. But essentially, it really doesn't work after a while. If they are not listening to any of the points that you're making, then at a certain stage, if there is no dialogue which is occurring and you are not getting a logical argument going on anymore, then it's time to disengage. Seek clarity, point things out, but walk away at some point because you're going to be wasting your breath. So that's pretty much most of the arguments that I'm going to try and make in this one. I will probably try and go a little bit more in detail at some stage in the future. So let me round it off in regards to philosophy and rhetoric. Now, obviously I mentioned that sophists can use rhetoric, but can we actually allow philosophers to use rhetoric? Now, this is a very interesting point because we are trying to state that there is beauty being added into logic. The very first important thing to state here is that power can corrupt, and if you are using wisdom, you're using philosophy, but using rhetoric at the same time, then you potentially are using beauty in words to get people to be persuaded into your logic rather than to be reasoned into your logic. This is almost the difference between religion and philosophy. Both are guided by morality, it's just the mythology of which they are getting to that point. However, some could say that transferring beauty into words can amplify the goodness in people's souls. This is potentially the panpiper's song, which can lead people into enlightenment, or if put in the wrong hands, could lead people off a cliff. A philosopher will almost encourage to the point of enjoy being refuted, as this provides the opportunity to refine their method of thinking. As a lover of wisdom, they ponder and search deeply into a never-ending journey, which is their Nevada itself. Remember, on the sophist side, they will try to discourage to the point of anger when they are being refuted. This is always a distressing moment where the influential power that they have gained may be in question. So, in the arms race for people's minds, may a philosopher grab the dagger of rhetoric to attack the sophist? Now, there's 2 points I'd like to make here. It's sometimes better to suffer rather than to perpetrate the same crime. But also, you could say in act of self-defense, someone may be perfectly in their right to use the same weapons that is being used against them. So, in the current state of affairs, I guess you would say that the philosophers are pretty much outgunned in every respect. So for them to take up the arms of rhetoric and fight against them, maybe it is okay, but with one watchful word, be wary of the philosopher who obtains too much power and always question them. Thank you again for your time. Please check out the Socratic method if you ever get a chance. Also, if you'd like to hear any more podcasts in the future, please subscribe, and thank you very much for your time.